In today's video, we're going to be looking at the Industrial Revolution. The late 1700s saw a dramatic change in the global economy as agricultural and merchant economies based on farming and trade fell to industrial economies based on production and manufacturing. Industry, that segment of the economy based on production of goods and services, came to use improved innovations in technology to forever revolutionize and shape the modern world. So from the late 18th to the early 20th century, the world industrialized and underwent four dramatic changes that would have a profound effect on socioeconomic and cultural conditions around the world. The first of these is that large factories replaced the cottage industry. Now, before factories began popping up across Europe, most textiles or clothing manufacturing was done at home through a system known as the putting out system, or the cottage industry. Now, what the cottage industry is a system of manufacturing goods in which raw materials were given by an agent to a person to basically take and produce a finished good, usually in their home or in their cottage. So, for example, a central agent or a businessman could take cotton, give it to a peasant woman who was then going to take that cotton and spin it into thread. That thread would be picked up by that person and then given to another peasant who's going to take that thread and weave it into cloth. Now, the process from start to finish could take weeks to complete, while the demand for things like textiles were ever increasing, leading to a need for a faster production method. Hence, the cottage industry goes away and is replaced by the factory. This is one of the major effects of the Industrial Revolution. Now, the second effect of the Industrial Revolution is the fact that manufacturing dominates the economy, in the fact that that is where the money was. You could produce things cheaply because it's mass-produced. You didn't have as many workers because most things have been mechanized and done by machinery. Therefore, you get to keep more of the profit. A third effect of the Industrial Revolution is that workers moved from the farms to the cities because many of them had lost their jobs, which we'll talk about later in this video. And so they moved to the factories because that's where the work was. That's where they could find jobs. And the fourth and final effect of the Industrial Revolution is the fact that the population grows across Europe and much of the world. And again, we'll talk about this much later in the video. But back to the Industrial Revolution. Technological innovations were at the heart of the Industrial Revolution and came to influence manufacturing and transportation around the world. But first, they would begin in the textile mills of Britain, thanks to an engineer named James Watt, who in 1769 improved the efficiency of the steam engine, making it more powerful and thus more productive. And again, he didn't invent the steam engine, he just makes it more efficient. Now, steam engines convert water into concentrated forces of steam, able to do mechanical work and power heavy machinery. And what the steam engine allows is for machinery to be powered by a force stronger than man or animal. And for thousands of years, that had been the only way to power things. Either you had to do it by hand, manpower, or you had to do it by animals using things like horsepower to pull and make machines work or make mechanical things work. But with the advent of the steam engine, steam power allowed big machines to run, and these big machines could either produce really big things or a lot of little things. But the key there is steam power. Without steam power, the Industrial Revolution could not have happened. And textile factories are the first to use steam power, helping to increase the speed and production of things like cotton into thread and thread into cloth, meeting the demand for textiles or clothing at that time. Now, the Industrial Revolution was underway with the innovations of the steam engine, which helped fuel and power the machines, the wheels, and gears of industry in the new factories of change. As innovative technologies created other innovative technologies, some people were unhappy with the tide of change coming to their communities. One group, known as the Luddites, are a prime example of that. The Luddites were these British textile workers who protested against changes made by the Industrial Revolution because it threatened their way of life. Now, these British textile workers probably worked in factories at that time that did not have machinery. And once the machines are brought in, it starts replacing some of the workers. These workers become very upset because this is how they make a living. This is how they make money. And all of a sudden, they become obsolete. They become unimportant because this machine can do their job. So at that point, they no longer are needed. And so they revolt against this change. They revolt against this new technology and essentially go on to destroy some of the machinery. They throw things into the machines to make them break the gears, costing Britain and the business manufacturers millions of dollars in losses because of the destruction to their property. And again, we're talking about the British here because Britain is the first nation to industrialize. Well, the real question is why? Well, one of the reasons why Britain is the first to industrialize is because it improved food production and machinery. Things like the tractor, which uses steam power to do work. And this steam-powered machine allowed for farmers to get more work done and become more productive with using less workers. And so they're able to produce more of a product, such as corn. And because they can produce more and don't have to spend so much on their workers, they can actually sell it for less, bringing down prices and allowing more people access to healthier nutritional food. But on the downside of that, this put a lot of agricultural workers out of work in need of a job. And of course, many of them move to the cities, as we said before, to find work, which they do, and they become factory workers. And so there's this huge migration of agricultural workers moving from the farms to the factories. But another factor in why Britain is the first to industrialize is the fact that Britain had a large access to natural resources that are needed to industrialize. They had iron, which is used to make the machines. They had water, which you used to boil and make steam. And they had a huge access to coal, which you used to fire up the furnaces to boil the water and produce the heat to make the steam to run the machines. And again, all three of these are major factors in industrialization. You have to have access to all three in order to industrialize. So putting all these factors together, Britain had the workforce to run the factories. All these agricultural workers were forced out of the farms into the factories. Britain had the natural resources of iron, water, and coal to make and run the factories. And thirdly, they had markets to sell these goods to. So all these things come together to be the reason why Britain is the first nation to industrialize. With the increase in the production of goods, factories were soon producing mass amounts of goods without the ability to transport the large and sometimes heavy goods from place to place. Therefore, a revolution in transportation was needed. In comes Richard Trevithick in 1801, who is an English engineer who invented the first steam-powered locomotive called the Puffing Devil. It is essentially the first train, or what at the time was called the Iron Horse, which was able to pull 10 tons of ore and 70 men at 5 miles per hour. Now, I know that doesn't seem very fast, but when you try to equivalent that to how many horses and how many wagons it would have taken to do the exact same thing, here we have one machine doing all that work and would have been able to do it a lot faster than the numerous trips it would have taken for a horse and wagon to do the same amount of work. And so the steam engine becomes very heavily used in transportation. Now, locomotives became very profitable once it was realized that they could transport large amounts of goods from manufacturing cities to port towns and transport large number of passengers over great distances in a short amount of time. And again, railroads connected the nation like nothing before because of this ability to move large amounts of manufactured goods across the nation. And like locomotives, steamboats allowed a large amount of cargo to be transported using the power of steam rather than manpower on boats, thanks to people like Robert Fulton in the Americas. But the working environment and transportation weren't the only things that changed during the Industrial Revolution, as Europe's population nearly doubles from 1750 to 1850, as it goes from 140 million people in 1750 to 266 million by 1850. This increase in population was due to 4 factors, one of which we've already talked about, and that is the increase in food supply due to advances in farming technology. Because farms were able to produce so much more food than they ever were, people are able to have more access to food and good nutrition, therefore they stay healthier and live longer. And the other 3 factors were a general decline in the amount of disease, wars, and death. Not that there's still not disease, especially in the cities at this point. Not that we're not fighting wars, and not that many people aren't dying. It's just you don't see as much of it. There's less disease. You don't see anything like the Black Death occurring during this time. You don't see these massive wars going on after the Napoleonic Wars had finished up in the early 1800s. And people are living longer. People are not dying because of war, because of disease, or because of the lack of nutrition. All these things are no longer factors, and therefore people live longer, more people are having children, and those children are living into adulthood, and the population of Europe reflects that in the fact that it increases so much. But while the population is increasing across Europe, there is one place in Europe where it is decreasing, and that is Ireland, due to the Irish potato famine that affects that country from 1845 to 1851, in which a water mold, which is a disease that infects the potatoes of Ireland, destroyed the crop for years, causing the death of nearly 1.5 million Irish. And the Irish were heavily dependent on potatoes, as it was a staple of their diet, meaning that they had it at most, if not all, of their meals in some form. So they were highly dependent upon this food to live and survive on. And when this food source, the potato, is destroyed, it causes massive starvation and death across Ireland. And so the population of Ireland drops from 8 million people in 1845 to 4.4 million by 1914, with 2 million Irishmen fleeing to Britain and other parts of Europe, while another 1 million flee to the United States for a better life. This increase in workforce allows America to very quickly industrialize along with Britain in the mid to late 1800s. So as we come to the close here, the Industrial Revolution was well underway, but this was just the beginning. As the world entered the late 19th century, the revolution of industry would get another boost as more innovative technologies are created in this great time of change.